Glory to Jesus Christ. My name is Deacon Volodymyr and you are listening to 12 Feasts for Today podcast. Most of our great feast dates 2,000 years ago, and they mark the important milestones of our history of salvation. As we celebrate the anniversaries of the important events in our families, as church family, we celebrate the important events of those who are very important to us, Jesus and Mary. In this podcast, we will try to see what event we celebrate, why we celebrate it, and what is the message of this 12 feasts for us today in 2021. Today is September 14th, and we celebrate the feast of the universal exaltation of the precious and life-giving cross. The gospel of today's feast is the gospel according to St. John, chapter 19, verses 6 through 11, 13 through 20, 25 through 28, and 30 through 35. The chief priests and the guard cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Now, when Pilate heard this statement, he became even more afraid and went back into the praetorium and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus did not answer him. So Pilate said to him, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and I have power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me if it had not been given to you from above. For this reason, the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and seated him on the judge's bench in the place called Stone Pavement, in Hebrew Gabbatha. It was preparation day for Passover, and it was about noon. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, take him away, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priest answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus and carrying the cross himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, with Jesus in the middle. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews." Now many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And it was written in the Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. Standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciples there whom he loved, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his home. After this, aware that everything was now finished, in order that the scripture might be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I thirst." When Jesus had taken the wine and said, "It is finished," and bowing his head, he handed over the Spirit. Now, since it was preparation day, in order that the bodies might not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for the Sabbath day of that week was a solemn one, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs be broken and they be taken down. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and then of the other one who was crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one soldier thrust his lance into his side, and immediately blood and water flowed out. An eyewitness has testified, and his testimony is true. He knows that he is speaking the truth, so that you also may come to believe. On this feast day of exaltation of the cross, we are reminded of the story of crucifixion, the saving and life-giving death of our Lord. But the feast of the exaltation of the cross reminds us two other stories. The elevation of the Holy Cross the day after consecration of the Church of Resurrection in Jerusalem in 4th century, and the return of the cross from the Persian captivity in the 7th century. It seems that the feast is not directly connected to the fact of finding the precious cross by Empress Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine, that was believed to happen in 326. But the feast of exaltation of the cross connected to the rite of the elevation of the cross done by the Bishop Macarius of Jerusalem the day after he consecrated the Church of Resurrection of the Lord in Jerusalem on Golgotha on September 13, 3035. Thus, we have the feast day on September 14th. Thus, when the Church, on the side of death and burial and resurrection of the Lord, the core events of our salvation, was consecrated, the faithful were able to venerate the cross, the instrument of our salvation. Also, we can understand the joy of people after the return of the cross in the 7th century and desire to see and venerate this symbol of victory of life over the death. Also, on that day, the Church from the old time prescribed the fasting. On this day, the Ukrainian Catholic Church encouraged her faithful to abstain from meat and dairy products. Exemption is granted to children younger than 14 years, person who turns 60, those who are seriously ill, pregnant, women after labor, and those who are breastfeeding, those who travel more than 8 hours, work physically hard, those who are fed from the table of the others, so they are not in charge of their own menu, and those who live out of charity. And sometimes when we fast, we also deprive ourselves from something else that we really like, enjoy. For example, like coffee, chocolate. We limit our use of technology, don't watching Facebook, Instagram, or don't watching TV on that day, for example. And when we will fast today, let this penitential practice that help us to return to God will not be for us only dietary restriction. Let this deprivation remind us about God. This deprivation should not be for the self-perfection, but help us to come closer to God. Let's use the money we save from not buying coffee or meal for charity, to share it with others. Let's use the time we gain from deprivation from social media or TV on this day for prayer or being with another person, truly being with another person. Let the success of today's fasting will not be for the growth of our self-esteem, how great we are, we did it, but for our growth in virtue. Well, not every parish has a relics of that very precious cross. It was exalted 1600 years ago. But still, in every parish, we will find the cross decorated with flower, elevated and presented for veneration during this whole week after the feast. Even more, as Christians, we wear the crosses close to our heart, we have them on our walls, we make sign of the cross when we begin our prayers or end our prayers, go out, live in the house, starting to drive. The cross is on the top of the churches, and we can find it on the tetrapod, not only this week, of past feast of the Exaltation, but almost every single day. On the tetrapod, this small table in the middle of the Ukrainian Catholic Church is where we can venerate the cross. Or when we enter Roman Catholic Church, usually we can find on one of the walls close to entry the crucifix. Honestly, have you ever paid attention how we are surrounded by cross or crucifix in our daily life? We get a habit of being surrounded by it so much that we get too used to it and not aware of the scandal of the cross, this expression used by the theologians. The cross in Roman Empire was the terrible, horrible way to execute the worst criminals and rebels against the empire. This capital punishment was so dishonoring human person, destroying dignity of the person who was handed over the cross, that no Roman citizen could be executed this way. And it was not polite to discuss this capital punishment among the people. So imagine for a moment what the Roman citizen could thought about us when they saw how we are surrounded by the cross, or even more, how we are venerating the cross. It is like to venerate the electric chair, the gun, or a syringe with a needle and poison used for death punishment in these days. That is craziness, isn't it? But why we venerate the cross? Because of Jesus. His death on the cross transforms, changed the meaning of the cross. Instead of being the instrument of death, destruction of all dignity, the cross, because not only death but also resurrection of the Christ, becomes the sign of victory of life over the death. It becomes the tree of life, as often we sing during our liturgical hymns in Eastern Church. We call it now life-giving cross. The instrument that was called to take life in the horrible manner becomes the source of life. Isn't it amazing? So what it means for us today? What is the message for us today while we are approaching the cross and venerate it? It is a sign of hope for us. It reminds us about our suffering that sometimes mortify us, destroy us. We have an expression that our life full of crosses, it means full of trials, suffering, difficulties. Well, it can create the false perception of the Christians as those who practice masochism, those who love suffering and look for the pain. But it is wrong. By the passion of the Christ, by Jesus who embraced the suffering, we see how God can transform it. It doesn't mean that the suffering is good. It doesn't mean the pain is good. The suffering, the pain, the difficulties are an unpleasant reality of our existence. We can run away from it, but we cannot escape it. Jesus in his passion teaches us to embrace the suffering, embrace our cross. But we are not alone. He is with us. We embrace our cross and follow his footsteps, following him, and then we can overcome our trials. Because we also know that God can transform the trials, the suffering, and even the death into life. This was manifested in the resurrection of Jesus. This is manifested now by the cross, once the sign of horrible, unspeakable death, and now the sign of victory over death itself. And we have this image before our eyes. And we look at the cross with the eyes of our faith. And let us conclude today with a prayer of the Stichera from the Matins. Oh, what a strange mystery! The cross, which carried the Most High as a cluster of life-giving grapes, is exalted today high above the earth. We are all drawn to God through it, and death has been forever swallowed up. O spotless wood, we enjoy the immortal fruit of Eden through you as we give glory to Christ. Thank you for being with us today. I wish you a blessed feast of the universal exaltation of the precious and life-giving cross. Now there will be a longer pause this time before our next podcast, because the next great feast will be the presentation of the Mother of God in the temple on November 21st. Meanwhile, we will have the celebration of the Feast of the Patronage of the Mother of God on October 1st, that is a very popular feast among Ukrainians, but it is not one of the 12 major feasts. So, our next episode will be on air on November 21st. Please stay tuned in, stay healthy. My name is Deacon Volodymyr, and may God bless you. Glory to Jesus Christ.